I'm Bob Mover, and I'd like to welcome you to On the Real Side. This week's guest, we're very happy to have a tremendous musician who I've known, I guess, since right around the time she first got to New York. Wonderful Anat Cohen. And Anat is going to be talking to us about her music, her life, and her relationship to the clarinet, which is her principal instrument, and an unusual and interesting choice. And so we, before I go further, though, we'd like to say that if you're enjoying this, which we hope you will, please give us a like and become a subscriber. It may not seem like much, but it does mean a lot to my associate Jesse Kaiser and myself, and it keeps us going to do this. And so, on that note, welcome, Anat. Hello.
Thank you, Bob. It's great to see you. It's great to be here, and thank you for inviting me to have this conversation.
Oh, sure. I think maybe one of the last times I saw you was in the early part of this century, maybe 2006. I'm bad with years that way, but when we both did a concert at Newport with Esperanza Spalding, put together a small group, and we were part of that. And I had a lot of fun that day. And,
Yeah.
I remember meeting you when you'd first come here, and I was happy you'd known something about my playing.
You're awesome playing.
Oh, thanks. Now, Anat is, interesting because she comes from a family of 9 children where, no, actually it's 9. Whatever you say, there are 3 musicians, 3 doctors, and 3 lawyers. Because in order to have musicians in a Jewish family, you had to have a couple of doctors and then you could have musicians. This is something that's not well known, but I'd like to explain this tradition that we have. And now, obviously, I'm kidding. I hope you take that as a joke. I just want to put him out on for a minute. She has 2 very gifted brothers, Avishai and Yuvan. And Avishai is a wonderful trumpet player, and her brother Yuvan is a reed player. Is it alto or tenor that he's?
He's now focusing only on soprano saxophone.
Soprano saxophone. And what is the age difference in who's the oldest? What's the hierarchy?
Yuval is the oldest. Yuval is our fearless leader, as being a children, the person, the elder child who does all the experiments are done on the eldest child, and then
I was one of them.
And then I'm the second child, so I already had to make less decisions. I had to just follow him, and Avishai is the third one. So there's about a year and a half between Yuval and I, and 3 years between Avishai and I. So we're all pretty close in age. Of course, when you're a kid, 3 years is a lot.
Oh, yes.
Even a year and a half. But, now, I just turned 50, but now, you get older and we are exactly the same age. And, we learn from each other. We are friends. We're close. They're my friends. They are my inspiration. They're my, we talk about, of course, we talk about the family and parents and growing up, learning about how we are who we are based on that. That's the obvious. I mean, at least for us, as being siblings. But, having the fortune of having my 2 siblings being not just musicians, but jazz musicians, have, some kind of a free spirit, the sense of exploration, the will and the need to communicate and to find common language, how to be supportive, musically. Being a jazz musician really shaped us as people. So we're very close.
How was that relating to your own parents? Were they artistic or jazz oriented, or Did they?
Very artistic. My father had a record collection, but he wasn't like a jazz head, but he did have, like when I was a kid, I remember there was a Benny Goodman record, and there was no, maybe not Benny Goodman. No, I got that later. But there was a Sidney Bechet. I mean, there was a little bit of like some jazz in the house, but really the parents got more into jazz through their children.
Really? That's
But they
interesting.
always loved music, and the radio, in every room in our house, there was always the radio on and some different music. It's like you go walk from different worlds, there's some different stations and you just walk around and there's always some music. And, my father knew a lot of music and you could recognize the different, movements of classical pieces, that he heard, and he knew he had really good ear. He really wanted to be a musician, but he was from a generation that the parents.
What was his profession? What did he end up doing?
He ended up working in a construction company and the construction real estate company, and he was a salesman and but for us, he was our dad. Our parents that supported us. So all the Israeli, like when my father passed away about 10 years ago, it was really interesting because we have the shiva where people come visit you,
Yeah.
and I got to see, I think probably almost every musician in Israel, because they all knew, everybody knew my dad, everybody know my parents, because they
So
were,
he frequented a lot of concerts and everything that he.
yeah, we grew up there, and they were physically bringing us everywhere and part of sitting in every rehearsal of conservatories and concerts. So it's a small country, and so everybody knows each other. So yeah, it's a beautiful community.
That's very unusual. Like for instance, in America, we were. I'm from an American Jewish family. The and my parents were musically inclined. My dad was a musician, played with Tommy Dorsey's band, and had his own big band and that kind of thing. My mom was a big band singer, and but my grandparents, for example, they musicians were bums basically, and you had a real profession that you did, and then you could do music on the side. That was what was expected in your average, normal, conservative, non-religious Jewish home. Was to be music was fine, and you should love music, but it wasn't something to do with your life. And it's great to see your parents were really encouraging you in that direction. Do they also encourage you in, I guess, in academic directions or this and that, or music was really stressed for you?
It's really interesting. They never really stress the educational part, although I mean, all the three of us went to college, and we went to Berklee College of Music, and they supported this decision.
You all
But
went to Berkeley?
yeah, we all went to
Really?
Berkeley. It's like one after the other. We all had the same roots of growing up, and then once we were adult, each one went on their own. But I think only after, like later on, meeting American or other musicians with other backgrounds, I realized how rare it is, and it was for us to have parents that never ever asked the question, well, how are you going to make a living?
Yeah,
How,
I'm fascinated by that too.
yeah. Now, I don't know if it's only good. I mean, it's good because they let us be who we are, but it would be good to also say, be realistic and think financially and plan for the future. But they saw that we loved music, and it was also interesting because we went to a conservatory. It wasn't like a classical music conservatory, but it's in Jaffa, in the south of Tel Aviv. In Jaffa, there's a conservatory that offered. It was a little lighter. Not the lessons were shorter, and there was a band and the music of New Orleans and big band, and they saw how our lives. And we also went to school for the arts and junior high school for the arts, and how our social life always braided with our musical life, and how it was basically inseparable. And all our friends were people we were studying with, and people we were playing with, and our afternoon activities became music, and slowly the sport went out the window. Like we all used to swim, but then the swimming classes were on the same day of the band, so no more sport and no more. So in some ways it got to like very obvious path, and they just let it be because we loved it. It became our passion and our lives, and it was beautiful how they supported it and never ever raised any question about, are you sure that's what you want to do?
And that's interesting because all three of you have also been, I would say, pretty successful in the business aspect of music too. You're all making a living. And he's, by the way, you live in New York.
Yeah.
Now is Avishai is back in Israel now, or is he?
Avishai is now back in Israel, and Yuval is back in Israel. So they both live in Tel Aviv, and I live in Brooklyn.
Yeah, and they're active there, involved in the education system as well.
Very much. Yuval is, I think every new Israeli person that comes, a new musician that comes to live in New York, at some point they were a student of Yuval, because he's teaching in the academy there and in the jazz department, and he's a very sought after teacher, educator, and very inspiring, and the students love him. So I just say Yuval, and they'll go, "Oh, Yuval." He gives all his heart to the students, and it's really wonderful. And he's very inspiring teacher and always very creative. And Avishai is also doing some education, but he's touring more, and because Israel is so close to Europe, then he goes and he has a lot of shows in Europe. So you can wake up in the morning and fly to Germany, play at night, and come back the next day, like I would
Right,
go
he's
to
doing
Cleveland from here, from New
right,
York.
like the Randy Breck. I mean, that's I've noticed that. I think for some reason that musicians that come from, I think a lot of your success and your brother's success in the world has to do with the stability, I believe, that your parents offered you. Because I notice in people, no matter where they're from, I've been very close with the Brecker family. Like Mike Brecker and I were very close friends, and Randy is also a good friend. But observing their life, like I could see that they had parents that really supported them. His father uh, was a lawyer and was a jazz, like your father was. I mean, but more so was directed to jazz. Just loved the jazz music and had the kids involved in that. Had them going to jazz camps before there were any, and but also taught them the values of being a business person. That you have to be wise about business in this world and not just be the blind artist that the world takes advantage of. And so I think that having emotionally stable and successful parents, not necessarily millionaires, but people that really made success of their lives, is the thing that set examples for a lot of the people like yourself. That you've never really scuffled, thank God. With the I mean, we all scuffle when we were trying to get established and this and that, but beyond establishing yourself, you've had a well managed career by yourself. You've done a good job, and I admire that. That's something I really like, and commend you for. Of being able to, you've had your own, and you have your own record company, which we'll talk about for a minute.
Yeah.
You started out recording for other record companies. Tell me a little bit about your recording history and
Okay.
establishing your own company, and let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I want to talk about it, but I want to just comment on something that you said, because you said you did it on your own. And the other day I was at Georgia State, and I was talking to some students, and they asked about my path, and I said, first of all, I have to say that I've been very lucky, because it takes a village. I mean, yeah, there's some things I've done on my own, Yeah, I sit and I had to do the long tones into the clarinets. Yeah, that's true. But beside the teachers and the people that got me to, and the inspirations, the people I was lucky to meet along the way, the people that became my booking agents, my even later a manager, my mate that we're going to talk about, Oded Levarima, that my partner at the record label, and people that I collected along the path, that I'm lucky that we share a vision and integrity and hard work and work ethic that maybe I got from seeing my parents working all their lives. So it's team effort.
Right, but it does come back to you. I'm not arguing, but I'm saying that in the end, you're the one that made the decisions of who to surround yourself with and who helps you. You know, because a lot of stories, and you know, we deal. One of the things I love about doing this podcast is I get to hear people's stories, which when we play together, you know, that's not usually what we talk about between sets and stuff. You know, well, what's your story? What did you do? And some of the stories of people that whose lives didn't work out quite as well often were. I mean, it comes down to the decisions we make. Who, you know, because there's a lot of people in music that offer you certain things that shine glittering things. Oh, I'll help you with this, and you're definitely the next blah blah blah, and let me handle your career and let me help you, and they're wolves in sheep's clothing or however you want to put it. So you have to be, and I think a good strong family upbringing with parents making the right decisions really gives you the foundation to go on your own and make and choose the right people as you have who have been able to help you. You know.
I like the way you see that. I agree. I agree that it is all part of the path. And and saying that I grew up being an Israeli, even though I live in the United States for 30 years, I grew up in a a place that it's tough place to grow up in, and I have a certain way of no BS, and a certain directness. And I don't know if being a woman, I have been like extra alert to predators, and not talking about sexual predator. I'm talking about like business predators.
Right. I know
And
what you mean.
and when you say about knowing to recognize and making decisions and knowing who to be aware of, and to say, I don't know, this doesn't feel right, and have the intuition to say, I'm not sure this is so kosher. I'm
But
not going
yeah,
to go this direction. So it really is. It's a combination of everything: our personalities, our circumstances, our background, the people we meet. I'm with you.
yeah, I see, and you know, so I think that you know, also, you know, let's for a minute to go in the direction of Israel. You know, growing up there, you know, Arnie Lawrence. Did you know Arnie?
Of course.
I figured you knew Arnie. You know, we love Arnie, and he's gone 20 years now. I can't believe that, but I remember when he had this dream, and he asked me to come to Israel with him. He wanted me to come to Jerusalem and head the. At first, it was going to be called the Gershwin Center for the Arts, and then he thought the Dizzy Gillespie Center for the Arts. So I'm not quite sure what he actually, or if he actually named the place, but I know he did create something there. And his dream was to have a place where the Jewish and the Arabic and Palestinian children, people, could share through jazz something in common, and that was a real vision that Arnie had. I didn't go with him because I have children in America, and I'm separated from their mothers, so I don't. They're not going to just tear up their lives and come with me somewhere. But I wished him all the best, and you know, it's interesting. There are a lot of. I mean, there are probably more Israeli jazz musicians and aspiring jazz musicians, along with Italians and a few Russians, from, I would say, of all the foreign people we have, uh, there's quite a few, but there's hardly any Palestinian jazz people that are even maybe aware of that. And you know, I wonder how that is. Like, let me ask you a question because I did grow up in Israel and I know very little about the actual growing up there. I mean, in school, in a public school, were were they totally separated? I mean, were the or did you have a sort of integrated thing? Did you go to school with Palestinian kids, or I'm just going to ask you these things?
No, unfortunately, I grew up in a, I mean, unfortunately, because I had a a good education that it very early on started to be like school for the arts, very unusual. So it's unusual for any regular person, that is not a musician. But I have to say that I grew up in the bubble, in the Tel Aviv bubble of like, okay, just here, and everybody's Jewish in the school, and everybody's Jewish in my building, and then in my neighborhood. I mean, I didn't even really think, you're a kid, you don't know, you grow up, what is around you. Only when you get older, you start realizing the situation is complex, and only when you get older and away, you can also see things from outside and say, well, hold on, it's also not fair, but I grew up, being very fortunate to pursue music and to pursue art, and in schools for the arts. So I was myself in a bubble inside a bubble.
Right. Now, I'm just wondering, as far as the Orthodox and religious, I mean, Friday night in Tel Aviv is certainly not your Shabbat. You really don't sense that. People are out and hanging out and partying and using their phones and doing all these things. And in your particular family, I mean, we have, like, let's say, observant and or Orthodox, as they say, and then conservative and Reform. How is the religion approached with the children? In other words, there's a famous story, Charlie Parker, when his daughter Priya, who unfortunately died, and he may have felt some guilt about this, I'm not sure, was born. They asked father's religion, and Bird had written devout musician. And, devout musician is sort of my religion, though I believe in the higher power that's given us this gift to be able to do this. And so, of course, but how we worship is through our devotion to our art. And I'm just curious with your parents, I'm kind of, what was their approach to the religious aspect of Jewish life? And
They of course, the more generation going back, the older generation, the closer to the religion they are. So my parents' grandparents were all religious people. They were in Europe, in Eastern Europe, and beards, and really much more religious. And it's I think the normal progression of like the next generation is trying, sometimes gets a little away, and the way we grew up, my brothers and I, if it's Friday night or if it's a Passover, I mean, okay, unless you don't, it's everything is national, so you don't have to do anything to make sure that you do something to say that today is a special day. So we grew up very secular. Like, I think I never went to synagogue growing up in Israel. I mean, sorry to say that. I hope I'm not offending anybody.
I'm curious.
But not, and I actually started to come closer to being Jewish living in United States, actually by playing weddings and bar mitzvahs and understanding, and on special holidays, and say, oh, today's a holiday. I wouldn't even known if I didn't have a gig, or I wouldn't hear the rabbis. And you learn about everything in school, but you kind of take everything for granted when you're a kid. You're like, okay, this is what it is, and that's it, and you don't question it twice. And the it's not even a choice. Like, I'm Jewish because I was born Jewish. So whether no matter what I say, it's kind of an interesting, when they come for you, you're Jewish.
Right, that's that's what my grandparents told me. Yeah.
And it's kind of like, it's really an interesting, and it's something that I never really thought about in this realization until October 7th. And you're like, okay, wow, okay. And then, is it something I'm choosing, and how do I choose to be? And it's just, it is like according to some people, that's who I am. And now, but I'm with you that music is something that is, for me, spiritually, something that our universal truth and what's right and what's wrong. I don't think it has anything to do with specific religion, like being a good person and being kind to, having compassion and having kindness and knowing what to do the right thing. This should not belong to any one religion. It should be a universal truth, and I'm for that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, especially when it goes down to the minute details of what kind of things you eat and what kind of, you know, things like that. But I won't get into that
Don't
discussion.
get into my plate.
Yeah, let's get away from
I
that.
mean, you can get into my plate. I'm talking about you in general, but we can talk about that, about what I eat these days,
But
because
I would rather talk about Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw.
we can talk about anything you want, Bob.
So, well, I was just thinking, I didn't really stick with the clarinet. I started, my father said, you should play all the reeds if you're going to play saxophone. But so I had a clarinet for a minute and I played it very badly. Uh, and I think, and my dad had some Benny Goodman records. In fact, there was one record that got me away, was one of the reasons I stopped playing guitar. There was a bigger reason, but that's another story. But the thing that really made me realize I wasn't going to be a guitar player was Charlie Christian's solo on Solo Flight. My dad had that record of Benny Goodman with Charlie Christian playing Solo Flight, and I said, I who could play the Everly Brothers songs and some Elvis and Little Richard, said, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. And then later on, when I heard Lester Young, I thought maybe that's a little more attainable. But nevertheless, I had no. I really appreciate Benny Goodman, but when I heard Artie Shaw, I thought had I gotten a little more into him, I was a little more attracted to Artie's uh, linear improvisation style, where Goodman to me played a lot of arpeggios and did it great. But and I know that you've dedicated a whole record, very nice record, that you made at the Vanguard with Benny Green and Lewis Nash and Peter Washington to Benny Goodman material, and he was a great inspiration on you. So you started with the clarinet. I read that you were playing with the Dixieland band from the Jaffa junior high school, and then you played some tenor with the big band. But what did you always know the clarinet was going to be your instrument? And was Benny Goodman? What was your instrument? The point that you realized that this was your axe. And did Goodman have something to do with that?
So it's a little funny how because I came back to the clarinet. I did not know that. First of all, I did not know I'm going to be a professional musician, and I don't even know what that means. But that the clarinet will open doors for me and will take me around the world. I did not know that when I was a kid, when I was starting, and but the first time I joined they called it the Dixieland band, at the conservatory back then, and playing the music of New Orleans, I knew nothing about improvisation, and I really didn't know anything about jazz, but we
Did
had the
Uran
original.
have records? Did Uran play records for you and stuff?
No, I just went. I just joined the Dixieland band, and there were parts with written solos of the original Dixieland transcriptions, and I was like, wait a second, this music feels really good. And there was something about the polyphonic element of it and the way, which maybe I could relate, thinking backward, like relate the way, because I have two brothers and there's just three horns playing trombone, clarinet, and trumpet, and everybody's being themselves, yet it works together. So I was like, oh, that kind of the way we are in a family, and we got to make it work somehow, have conversations, spontaneous conversations. And this feel of swing, there was something so refreshing about it that you know I love to play, but I really did not know how to improvise, and I already had a few years of more classical music background, and it's a tricky thing because the later you start with improvisation, the more challenging it is because my ears already, after playing Mozart and Mendelssohn and Brahms, and then you go back and you try to anything I will play would sound stupid. It's because I know what the great masters already have written, so I'm like, not for me, thank you. And then they asked me to pick up the tenor saxophone to play in the big band at the conservatory, and at the end of the rehearsal, everybody played Splanky Blues, and everybody took two choruses, and my turn came, and I'm like, no
I'm not
way.
gonna do it. Huh?
I'm not going to do it. Insecurity, the fear of being wrong, a fear of being laughed at. I don't know. It's something that what our personality is and our insecurity is something we deal with all our lives. So it's still there to some extent.
Who or what brought you over that little bridge there? Because you came far over that bridge. What was the?
It was a process, and I went to high school for the arts, and I joined. They started a jazz major, and from when Yuval, my brother, wrote me a solo to play at Splanky Blues, he actually wrote a two-chorus solo for me that I would get up and play every week. So I love playing. I love the attention and playing the solo. I just didn't know how to come up with it on my own. And then I learned jazz in high school, and I studied with some teachers in Israel, Amikam and Kimmelman was my teacher, and Eli, and it was a process. But I think what really, then I got accepted to go to Berklee College of Music, and then suddenly I was just in another country pursuing, study of jazz, and say, okay, I guess now I'm committed. And it was at Berkeley that Phil Wilson, the great Phil Wilson,
Great
trombone
trombone player for those
composer.
who don't know of
Yeah,
fame.
go for it. You can talk about Phil.
No, I'm just saying that Phil was somebody who, uh, you know, uh, many people who went to Berkeley said that Phil was really a major on very different instruments.
Yeah.
Even Makoto Ozone, who had been one of my students there, said the people that I taught for 3 semesters at Berkeley, said the people he learned the most from at Berkeley were Phil and me. And that's so, but you tell me about Phil because I'm not, I just know about his reputation.
Yeah, because he was, well, first of all, he had the ensembles, and he was dedicated educator. But he came to me and he heard me playing in the small group, and he said, you really have a voice on the clarinet. And this point, I'm a student at Berklee College of Music. I got accepted as a tenor saxophone player. I'm all studying only saxophone, Garzon, Billy Pierce. They're like my teachers. And there come Phil Wilson and says, you have a voice on the clarinet. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, what does a 20 little year old knows about your own voice on? And it's just kind of stayed this statement, and it stayed in my mind. And I really didn't know what it meant until I started to play a little bit. Already moved to New York, and I was, suddenly at some point I'm realizing, wait a second, I'm doing more gigs on the clarinet than the saxophone. But they were not jazz gigs. I was playing Brazilian shore on the clarinet, Argentinian music with this guy Pablo Ablanedo. I'm playing with Achilles, great Venezuelan quattro and guitar player Achilles Baez. I'm playing Venezuelan, Colombian music, Afro-Cuban music. I'm doing a lot of things on the clarinet, and I'm like, and I feel good. I feel like, oh, so maybe I start to bring all those things into what I do. And I said, okay, I feel comfortable on the clarinet, and I found that I can be who I can be myself on the clarinet much more than I found on the saxophone, on the tenor saxophone at that point. And that's how clarinet took over. So it wasn't really like I listened to Benny Goodman and I listened to Sidney Bechet, and I loved the instrument. But what really brought me back to jazz, to being like try to pursue like find myself on the instrument, was folkloric music for South America. So that was like the Benny Goodman. Now, of course, the influences and of the way of playing, the beautiful tone, the mastery of the instrument, and the expressive of Artie Shaw. I mean, there's not much like it. You can't. They're each like they're all personalities, you know. But people always say, "So who was your influence? Was it Benny Goodman or Andy Shaw?" And I was like, it was other sounds.
Well, also you were of a generation, being that, let me see, you came to New York. You were 24. I believe somewhere around that age,
Charlie.
early 20s. You also had examples like, Eddie Daniels was around, and I don't know if you ever heard Perry Robinson.
Yeah,
Perry who had a very, there's a unique voice on clarinet, and Perry was kind of avant-garde, but definitely, very knowledgeable. And I never knew anybody that sounded like him. He had his own approach. Um, there was. Did you listen to Lester Young's clarinet playing?
yeah. I couldn't believe I didn't even know that existed until a certain point. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, I mean, some of those. He just did three or four things
Yeah,
on clarinet, but Blue and Sentimental, and the Way Down Yonder in New Orleans. Those solos,
sentimental is
just
beautiful.
beautiful. Is I Want a Little Girl, some of that stuff. And then there's Paquito, who I think was born with a clarinet in his mouth.
Absolutely.
you know, and Ken Poplawski.
Of course.
Did you hang out? Did you get? I mean, did you practice with some of these people or have relationships with any other clarinet players? That's what I'm trying to ask.
The last two you mentioned are the two of Paquito and Ken Poplawski were like two people that as I was kind of starting to play clarinet again, they were there and they were like the young generation of like, I was like making the clarinet sound so awesome and so yummy and such an inspiration. I mean, I love Ken Peplowski. I love his playing, his tone, his musicality, and and we get once in a while we do a show with Paquito and Ken and I, and Eddie Daniels is a monster on the instrument, and enthusiastic about so many kinds of music and fearless, which is also an inspiring thing for me. And at the time when I was still in the mid 90s, I was playing with an all-female big band called the Diva Jazz Orchestra, and they had a smaller group that we went to be part of a festival in Clearwater, Florida. Um, and that was Arbor's record. Arbor's record was dedicated to swing, and the people that were in that festival that I got to see and hang out and play with, people like Flip Phillips
Oh
and
yeah,
Jerry Jerome, and
big
then
time player.
so Ken Poplawski was there. I met him in that scene, and also Buddy DeFranco was there.
I meant to ask you about him. That's
And which was amazing. And then was Bob Wilbur was there, and Kenny DeVerne was there.
pretty diverse. Another one, yes.
Yeah. So suddenly I'm like, oh, here's the festival, and all these clarinet players are part of the. Because at the festival you wouldn't see clarinetists. Like it's very rare to see. You wouldn't go to Newport and see it necessarily. Well, maybe in Newport you would, because George was a
George
fan.
was traditional.
But it wasn't like the instrument kind of lost its popularity. But suddenly I go to this fest, like, oh, all this, wow. So and that was a switch in my mind. I was like, wow, maybe it's possible to do that. And I started to play more and more clarinet.
And that's when that happened. What year was that?
Yeah. It's like late 90s, early 2000, and when I started to play more clarinet, and then
And
yeah,
what brought you there was the tenor. Like that was you were actually
yep,
known
yeah,
more closer to feeling with the tenor at that time.
yeah.
And who had you recorded with? What situation brought you to that festival?
I was with the small group, the part of the Diva
Oh,
Jazz
the Devo
Orchestra.
Orchestra, right?
Yeah, that's how I met all these people, and you know, mm, Tommy Newsom was playing tenor saxophone, and wow, it was just beautiful people, and those are the people that a lot of people that Bill Crow and the people that played with Benny Goodman. So that was my connection of playing with the people that play with Benny.
Right.
Ruby
Right.
Braff was there, you know,
Be brash.
Ruby Braff. And it was really interesting because, you know, I know Benny Goodman from records, and then I see the people and they talk about the experience and the Benny Goodman Ray.
Right. The Ray and
Ray and you know, so it's really interesting when you hear the musicians talk and the inside conversations and also, you know, when I met them, the people in, you know, in their 70s and 80s. I mean, when I met Flip Phillips, it was his 85th birthday celebration. You know, and you put all these musicians, like we all going on the bus, or we all sitting in the bar, and everybody is like 20 years old, just giggling and laughing and having a drink and just want to hang and just want to play. And it was really important for me to understand that music has no age, and it doesn't matter if I'm in my 20s and someone is in their 80s. When your heart is in the same place, the music bonds everybody, and the music is such a strong glue. And it was a really important lesson.
yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. And those guys invented that. You know, they really had a wonderful time with that. I only had one peripheral experience with Benny Goodman. There was an agent named Phoebe Jacobs who was very close friends with Peggy Lee and with all kinds, Sarah Vaughan and all these people. And Phoebe kind of helped me out a little bit at one point. And I had made a record with Yoshiaki Masuo. Very first time I was in a recording studio, and we had recorded "Like Someone in Love" as a duet. And she was friends with Benny, and she said, "Oh, by the way, I played your record for Benny Goodman." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, he liked it. He really thought you really sounded good. He said to tell you that he'd enjoyed it." I said, "Oh, that's wonderful." So that was my only experience he had heard me. I said, "Oh, that's great," you know. And I never did meet Artie Shaw, who kind of was a very interesting personality. Now, Tony Scott, did you ever run into Tony Scott?
Man, one day I walked to I think it was the Fez in New York, and Tony Scott was playing, and I never heard a clarinet sounding like that. And I stood there, my jaw dropped. It was a life-changing, actually,
Really?
experience because the way he was using the low notes, and the way he was applying the subtones of the saxophone into the clarinet, in kind of the way that you like the legit way of playing the clarinet is this is no, not allowed to and say, well, it was like, wow, man, you just in the clarinet became this the snake charm. It was like so meditative and so deep and I was like, wow. And it was really influential for me because I started to it changed my sound on the clarinet, hearing Tony
Really?
Scott.
That's
Yeah.
oh, he would love that. Did you get to meet him at all?
Just said hello, but not really.
He was a very forceful personality. I'm sure you've heard Tony Scott stories, you know. He
Not
was
really.
well, Tony Scott, I'll tell you a little Tony Scott story. We became very close friends, and we'd argue all the time. He loved to argue. He was like Clifford Jordan. They just I used to call them jailhouse arguers. Not that they were necessarily in jail, but they just wanted to. You say blue, they say gray, and they kind of enjoyed that. So, but Tony was when I was in playing with Chet Baker in the early '80s, about '81. We were in Cologne in Germany, and Tony Scott started showing up every night to our gig. He had been on tour not far from there, and he like really enjoyed the music. We had this group with Chet and John Erdley on trumpet, two trumpets and me, trumpet flugelhorn and me actually, and then a rhythm section. And so Tony Scott started sitting in with us. He'd come and sit in the last set and play and just hang out. He had some days off and he'd follow us around. So he loved me. And he said, you know, man, you are so wonderful. He said, I haven't heard alto play like that, blah, blah, blah. Very nice compliment. He said, let's have lunch tomorrow. So I said, sure. So he comes up to my pension, uh, and it's about lunchtime. And I was so crazy at this point. I was using some heroin and just didn't have a very strong, I was so solipsistic, I couldn't see outside of my own box. I was undergoing a very unhappy love affair was ending, and all kinds of things were going on in my life. And I said, yeah, just give me a minute. And without thinking about it, I got up. I got out of bed because I was in bed when he came up to get me up to go to lunch. And I get out of the bed. I roll out of the bed, and I make a little line of heroin to do. I wasn't addicted, but I was what they call chipping. I was messing with it. So he starts crying. He starts, oh no, you don't, no, you don't. And I said, what? Come on, I just want to get high and go. He said, no. And he knocks over the table with the heroin. And then he picks me up. He was a big guy. And he slams me against the wall. And he starts slapping my face. And he said, I've lost too many people to this. My friends have died because of this. It's taken my friend. And you're my next friend. And I'm not going to let it happen with you. You're not going to die on me. You rotten, he starts swearing at me and this and that. How dare you? You don't even go near this. This is not for you. Bang, bang, bang. Slap me around. And then, come on, we'll go have lunch. And then he explained to me how he had lost Charlie Parker and how he had lost different people through this and how he felt that I was a gifted person on a level that he wanted to be around and that he didn't want this to happen to me. And it really made me turn around. It made me think, well, what am I doing? Do I really want to do I want to mess with this stuff? Am I really getting into something I won't be able to get out of? Because I always thought I could get out of it. I'd get out and do a little bit and he actually saved my life in a way.
This is a wild story. Wow.
Yeah, it's so
right place at the right time.
Right place at the right time, but I'll never forget how sad he was and that tears were streaming down his face as he was slapping me.
Well, maybe if you didn't have this strong emotional reaction, you wouldn't be affected so much. So that's what you needed in order to affect you.
That's what happened, and
well,
then we had a big argument on the Italian radio one night. This is just the lighter side of it. We're playing a concert at this festival in Monterodoni, and he keeps insisting that my name is pronounced Mover. And I said, it's Mover. And we get into this thing where we end up like screaming at each other on the radio, I told you my damn name, blah, 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 and then he says, it's Mover. And so
that's funny.
He would do these little things. Anyway, he's another guy I miss. He would always give me his clothing. His old, you go and he'd give you a care package of like, oh, here's that sweater. I love this sweater, but I wore it too much. Why don't you take it? This and that. And then one year I ran into Phil Woods and I said, oh yeah, I just saw Tony Scott. He said he'd seen you recently. And Phil said, yeah, did he give you any clothes?
Well, it makes sense. If you wear something, you were on stage a lot with it, then you pass it along.